Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you on time. I was detained at security for a half an hour in the beginning, so yeah, the security it works in here. So I have had the opportunity to have conversations. I believe the event is being hosted at the behest of Secretary McDonald, and I want to thank you very much for bringing us together. Yeah, it's terrific. It's terrific. We have Secretary Pritzker, who has done ridiculously varied, awesome things. She has, I mean, it's actually mythical. But the number of companies she started and been successful in, and the range of them is, I think, immortal. And then you decided to come and do your first active service, and so way to use a warm-up job to do it. And have done extraordinary things at Commerce, and it will be a pleasure to talk with you about that. But a rock star in everything you touch, so I'm not going to say I hope your personal life isn't good, but it would be karmic if you had at least something going on there. And then next is Beth, who is the Acting Director of Office of Personnel Management, which I think there are two things to just consider about that. There are 2 million federal employees, 250,000 new hires every year, and I believe Beth gets to call the snow days. So that's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot on that. And then Administrator Bolden, who my sons are 9 and 5, and Administrator Bolden, you are the most important person in the world in terms of that. They have a lot of questions that I'll ask you offline in terms of that. But also you run an organization that is the number one. The employees have the highest level of engagement, year after year after year, and it doesn't matter if you're doing a transformation or not. Employees have the number one level of engagement, and you have been on every single side of it. You have been an astronaut of incredible consequence. You have led this agency, and not just to do what it does, but then I suspect in your spare time you do things like make planes a lot better, which is great. So we haven't, yeah. But really, like, cleaner, quieter, safer planes, they're coming because he has weekends. So we have an unbelievable opportunity to think about transformations. And so I have some questions that are really just meant to get the juices going. And then after having had conversations and reading so much about you, I know the best thing I can do is get out of the way. But I will start with you, Secretary McDonald. And the first question I have is, or the first comment is that you talk a lot about principles, not rules. I could have used one at the front gate. But in seriousness, what occurred to me, what happened to me at the front gate was because we need those rules. And you want, and I love it, you aspirationally want us to be guided by principles. So I'd like to hear about why you think in an organization like the VA that has hundreds of thousands of employees and is so distributed, how you think principles could possibly work, and why not just make exquisite rules?
That's a great question, Francis, and one that I love my colleagues' comments on. You know, by definition, government is a rule-based organization. In fact, we have a building with, several hundred people in it, with a big dome on it, where all they do is make rules. And what you find is... Which building is that? What you find is when you create a rule, you have an unintended consequence which you may not have anticipated. The best customer service organizations in the world, and I use USAA as a classic example, are principle-based. Why? Because the employee can't guess every situation they're going to have and then have time to look in the rule book to figure out how they should behave. So at VA, we have been juxtaposing two situations. One situation was in Spokane, where one of our employees, frontline employees, gets a call from a veteran with a broken foot says, I need help getting into the building, the employee says, I'm sorry, there's a rule here that says I can't help you, call 911. He calls 911, fire truck, EMT come, carry him 100 meters into the building. It seems to me that good customer service, if that were your mother, is that what you would do? No, you would go out and help them come into the building. You juxtapose that with what happened in White River Junction, Vermont, where one of our nurses, Sharon Levinson, noticed her veteran missed an appointment. Not unusual for a mental health appointment. 20% of mental health appointments are missed across the industry, not just VA. And she was worried, though, and she knew this person. She got in touch with the VA police, got in touch with the county police. They went out and looked at the house. There was no footprints in the snow. They broke into the house and discovered he was wedged between furniture, unconscious, on his way to death. They put him in the hospital, revived him, and he's healthy today. We need to be, if we're going to succeed in our vision to become the #1 customer service organization in the federal government, we've got to be principle-based rather than rule-based.
As a follow-up to that, I guess if you broke into the house and he was watching TV, you would need to not consider that a failure and not have anyone get in
Exactly.
trouble, right?
It's a great point. One of the biggest barriers to creating a principle-based organization is the leadership. You have to have trust between the leadership and the employee. The leadership has to have the back of the employee. So if they make that decision and they discover they're wrong, you celebrate that. And I think John, who was on the previous panel, actually had a case early on in his transformation where the employee tried something and it failed,
Yeah.
and he promoted them. And that's a great way to get the point across.
And I think when he called him into the office, the employee was pretty sure he was getting fired.
Get fired,
Yeah,
of course,
yeah,
of course,
and,
yeah.
Instead getting. Does the rules versus principles resonate to others? And if so, would be delighted. It seems like it does for you.
So, it does. Any of these?
Yeah, just press it down.
I got it, got it. You know, it's a real challenge, as the secretary was describing, because as Bob was describing, I know, I've been trying to get them to call me Beth at OPM, hasn't really succeeded. When you're operating at the scale and complexity of the federal government,
Yeah.
it is hard in a place that is very disparate. Of the 2 million people, 85% of them don't work in Washington, D.C., so they are out in the country, defending the country, serving citizens. You've got to figure out how you can do that in a way that you've got that confidence and have their back. I know at OPM, we spend a lot of our time and energy not just telling people to follow the principles and the rules, but trying to get people to follow the real rules, not the rules that have been sort of adapted over time forever. And so you've got to get that mindset right and in partnership and make that work.
Please.
Yeah, what I would say is, absolutely principles versus rules, because you can't rule make for every instance. That's crazy. And second, it limits the thinking of your employees. And ultimately, what you really want is the folks working for you to be, entrepreneurs, organizational entrepreneurs, and to understand where you're trying to take the organization, and then have their own ideas about how to get there, and in fact, help you be clearer about how we might actually achieve and accomplish the objectives. And we did that by doing a strategic plan. And saying, we're about 5 things. And then what was amazing, we said we're about trade and investment, we're about innovation, about environmental intelligence, data, and organizational excellence. And what happened was, I didn't define what those things meant. Our teams did, and what happened is we had a cross-department group come together and say, if we're going to do organizational excellence, we have serious problems with acquisitions, financial management, human resources, and information technology. They came together and said, at our executive management team, we want to address those problems, and we're having them in, whether it's at Census or at the Patent and Trademark Office or at International Trade Administration. I mean, we run 12 agencies that are rather disparate. They're all customer facing, but they're all very different. But they had a common set of problems. And they then proposed to me, they wanted to create a shared services platform. And then they devised it, and they came and said, here's how we'll share the cost among ourselves. And so we've ended up with this enterprise-wide delivery model of these services. It took us almost 18 months plus to get Congress to buy into it.
So
Because
you were all ready.
we were ready, and we've been sitting, and we in fact hired the head of the, we got someone very senior who ran shared services at Accenture to say they wanted to come in and run this thing. And we spent 18 months, it took us 18 months for Congress to get it, that this was, you know, how we could be a much more customer-centric approach to delivering internal services to our department. And we're not as large as what certainly not the VA. And, we're like 46,000 employees. So we're small relative to a lot of other organizations, large on an absolute scale. But the point that was just made that I think is really critical is when your employees take a risk to come to you and say, here's how we think we can do this better. If you're not prepared as a leader to back them up, then you will shut down that kind of entrepreneurship for a very long time. And, you can ask, I asked questions, I wanted to understand the business plan, I wanted to know how we were gonna pay for it, how we were gonna do it. You can ask, but at some point, you've got to let the organization own itself. The other place where having the backs of your employees is when dealing with challenges. So how do you get our employee base, the federal employee base, to take risk? There's no upside for these folks to do it, and yet for us to try and run good organizations, you need the person who's gonna walk out on the sidewalk and help the poor person. You need someone to take a risk, use their common sense. How do you get them to tell you they have a problem? So when I was in the private sector, I used to say, as the leader, if, let's say someone didn't directly report to me, as a courtesy, they would let me interview the person before they were gonna get hired. And I would say, you wanna know how to get fired here? And they'd look at me like I was crazy, and I'd say, 2 ways. First, lie, cheat, or steal. You're out of here. And the second is keep a problem to yourself, right? Because what happens with problems? They get worse. They don't get better, they get worse. And so I tried to bring that concept to the federal government. If you have a problem, the worst thing that happens is the secretary reads about it in the newspaper. The best thing that can happen is the earlier you bring it to our attention, I promise you get extra resources to deal with your problem. And so then what happens is you as a leader and you as a senior management team, you've got to be prepared to back up that promise. So someone comes and puts a real problem and dumps it in your lap and says, here's the problem. And of course, in the federal government, everybody wants to run the other direction. Not on my watch, didn't happen, let's cover it up, blah, blah, blah. And instead, we said, oh, okay, that's a problem. Let's put more resources to try and solve that problem. And you have to and then you can't play the blame game right out of the box. You've got to really instead say, how are we going to solve the problem? Then diagnose how it happened.
May I ask, how much did your knowing, perhaps, that you weren't going to be in government for the long term give you the liberty to do that?
That had nothing to do with it, because basically, these problems tend to blow up fast. The resolution of them takes a long time, but they tend to get worse and become you can't let them just sit and hope, oh my God, I've only got 24 months left, and hopefully nobody notices this problem. It's gonna you better deal with it. And so but it's been really interesting to watch the organization respond to the idea of principles, not rules, and willingness to have their backs. And you have to demonstrate it by actually, when they come and they say, I have this great idea, we want to do, enterprise-wide services, to say that, that's not nuts, let's figure out how we can do that really well.
Yeah, and history is littered with leaders wanting enterprise-wide services and try to push it down, and the organisms reject it. So I think it's quite clever that you set the conditions for it to be asked for.
We just set the aspiration, we wanted organizational excellence. We want to beat NASA too.
We do too.
We all do. But
That's
so,
adorable.
True, everybody does.
you know what, and you know
Charlie
what?
sets a high bar.
And Charlie, go Charlie, because
Yeah,
the
you
more,
bet.
the higher his bar, the more it helps us to say, hey, why can't we be that, right? And so then your own team says, okay, we want to do, here's an idea how we could, reduce frustration, increase employee engagement, and, have better scores.
So Charlie, let's just go right to it. What's the, aside from the fact that, if you're an astronaut, there aren't a lot of other places to work. What is it
No.
that allows, that creates such incredible employee engagement year after year, decade after decade?
Well, one thing that helps is we're a mission-oriented organization. Bob and I, both being military, we know what that means. The military is like that. They have a mission to do, so that really helps. But that doesn't make for employee engagement. We have a number of, when you talk about principles instead of rules, we live and work in space now for 6 months at a time, minimum, for a crew member. And so, unlike the old shuttle days when I flew, where you had something every 5 minutes on your plan for the day. So there was no flexibility. You followed the rules, the flight plan. Today, it's impossible to do that for a crew, because a crew that launches today, 4 weeks from now, may be working an experiment that just happened to come into play. So we teach them basic principles for, okay, if you're going to do this kind of experiment, here's some things you might think about. And then we put them in touch with the ground so they can get help. But the big thing is we encourage failure. We have a philosophy that says fail early, fail smart, or smartly, I guess, to be appropriate. For my mother was a librarian, so I want to make sure I say that right. But it is because we depend on technology to advance. If we don't develop new technologies, we're not going anywhere. We're sitting on the ground. And the only way you're going to do that is to be willing to take bold risks, and every once in a while fail. So that's why we say fail early, fail smartly. What you don't want to do is fail when you're getting ready to put a human being on the vehicle. We don't count risk the same in every case. If we're just sending cargo to the International Space Station, for example, we rely on commercial entities today. NASA does not provide transportation from Earth to space, and we never will again. When we phased the shuttle out in the summer of 2011, we did it because the president said, look, previous presidents said they wanted to do this, nobody put the money on it, I am, and so we started developing or facilitating the success of a commercial space launch industry. And so we now have two companies, Boeing and Orbital ATK and SpaceX, that carry cargo. A third company, Sierra Nevada, is about to join them. We have two companies, Boeing and SpaceX, that are now building crew modules that are going to carry our astronauts to space, hopefully not this year, but next year, if all goes well. So right now, we're relying on the Russians. We can't do that if we aren't willing to take risk, if we aren't willing to watch them and help them and give them the room to fail now and then. We've had failures on the part of all of our commercial enterprises. So I think that's one thing that allows us to do what we do.
Yeah, please.
But, and to do that, being a customer of this enterprise, right? We're a customer at NOAA, where we send our satellites up, but we use the NASA facilities, and in fact, we hand over the operations often of our satellites for the first period of months to NASA. The other thing that has to go on is we have to have transparency between departments, so that, and that creates opportunity for your employees to, we have to set a tone of what kind of engagement we want. And we have to, so it's not just your own organization, it's also what's the culture and and how do you get those two cultures to work well together, so that we can it's so that we can both be successful. So you make the transition to the private sector for vehicle launch, and we as a customer need to go right there with you. And that was, we just had a big launch that was hugely successful. But, you know, you think about it, that took years and years to happen. And I think the success was because our two cultures were also very similar. So it becomes more and more important, as I see it, in the federal government, to where we have one kind of approach. You can't afford anymore to have, like, the military be over here and have their approach and the Commerce Department over here, because the overlap of things we're doing together is greater and greater.
It's interesting, and then I'm going to go to you, Beth, that the many of the units, it grew up in silos, and now they have had to develop the ability to partner, and that there's this real partnership, which frankly many organizations struggle with. And so what you're saying is that we need to do it, and indeed we have evidence of doing it quite well. It's beautiful.
And, you know, when you're thinking about doing what Penny described about working across, and we think about either OMB or OPM, we are trying to create some set of rules, because actually Congress mandates that you have to write rules, and when they pass laws, you have to write regulations. It is about trying to find the right balance that enables you to have sufficient commonality, but recognize that, like, the VA is very different from NASA, is very different from Commerce, the Department of Education, the Department of Agriculture. They're different between each other's and inside too, right? Commerce is a great poster child for that. And so this is part of saying, how do you do this in a collaborative way? We are running with all these folks' teams a program now about trying to get folks to use the flexibility in the hiring system that works within the merit system principles, right? It's called Hiring Excellence. I brought my favorite book, right? Mythbusters, because people think they have to follow rules that actually don't exist.
It's true.
But
She only brought one copy, but yeah, and you just.
I got more in my
And,
briefcase.
and this is, now I understand, Penny, why you're so successful. You'll
No,
be
but-
leaving with the one copy.
So, but we went through and we did.
Or we have the most hiring problems.
We've got a big collaborative process that said, what are basically the 7 lessons we learned? And in the implementation process, we said to the agency, here's the 7 lessons and the X practices that work. 3 categories, 7 lessons. You come back and tell us which one is most important to your agency. How are you going to focus on that one? We're not going to tell you to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You pick 2, and by the way, if you need an extra one, add another here can come in, and you can do that instead. So you're trying to find some consistency, because agencies work together, but enough flexibility to do that. And that is, getting that balance right is really, really, really important, and not so easy to do.
In our conversations, and in the previous panel, we talked a lot about communication. You have perhaps the most interesting communication challenge, in that the VA is often liked by one group of people more than another group of people at any moment in time. And I don't know that it's predictable which one it is. So you always have someone who needs magnificent communication. How do you handle that?
Well, you're right, Francis. The communications challenge at VA is very difficult, because no matter who's in charge of the government, there's always a political opposition. And in our case, there's a political opposition called the Concerned Veterans of America, which is a group of people funded by the Koch brothers, who think that if you can demonstrate that VA doesn't work, that then you can eliminate the Affordable Care Act, and there's no risk of nationalized health insurance, because VA is, in a sense, the poster child for this group, libertarian group, of nationalized medicine or integrated medicine. So you've always got that opposition, and even though the data says 86% plus of veterans prefer going to the VA, VA is a healthcare system, and people do die in a healthcare system. So anytime something negative may happen, it can be publicized. Another thing that happens is the crisis was publicized in 2014. The way Congress and government works is you have something called the Inspector General, you have the Office of Special Counsel. They start doing studies, and then they publish them over time. So even Richard Burr, a senator, said to me, he said, "You don't want this job." He says, "As long as you're going to be there, some study is going to be published about what happened 3 years ago." So while you're in the midst of transformation, you've got agencies of government publishing studies about 2014 or 2013 or 2012, which show up in the news as if it's current news. So the communications challenge is immense. There's no question about it. And as we all know, when you lead a transformation, the thing that you can't possibly do enough is communicate.
And it's interesting, as you spoke about your journey, that I almost felt like you would need, whatever everyone else needs, you need 2x of it in terms of
Or even
capturing-
10x.
Or even 10x.
Yeah,
of it in
yeah,
terms of
no
capturing-
question about it.
and capturing the frame. Beth, you get to sit in the purview of seeing across all of these organizations, and you have said to me, and you had no irony in your voice when you said it, that the U.S. government wants to have the world-class organization everywhere it goes. And I was so moved by it, I had goosebumps, I was great, and then I went and had dinner with my family. And I told them that.
Good.
And then they just started telling me about their experiences. And none of them were positive. So how do we, you just have to be that when you're the leader? See, I think you really believe it. Like you would, so just help square the difference from, we go to the DMV.
DMV is not the federal government.
Help me, go there.
No, I'm quite seriously.
I mean, it's a myth, it's a myth.
It's a myth. No, but so I will tell you, having moved here from California, I have gone to the DMV. The DC DMV's ability to service you online, I just sold my car. I never had to put a foot in the DMV. I could do the whole thing online. I sent them a photo. I sent it in. I was done. By the way, that is not the federal government. That is the DC city government, who's done a terrific job with the DMV. And so there is this myth of things, and it's hard. You are, comparing this to at least my fellow former corporate context here. Think about a corporate context where today you are planning your budget for 2 years from now. You don't know what money you have to spend for the rest of this year. You don't know what money you are going to get for next year, and you're supposed to predict what you're going to need 2 years from now to a pretty granular level. In a corporate context, you would find a way to adapt through that, and when you had a problem somewhere, you would be able to move the funds to deal with that. I know, because
You wouldn't tolerate it in a corporate context.
that is not how things work here, because Congress controls the budgets, and that's their job. So it is just a very different context, and it operates at scale. There are lots of things the federal government does very well. The data that Penny's Department of Commerce provides to every single person in this room when we look up the weather on our iPhone, that is the federal government every single day. The vets who go to Bob's hospitals and get state-of-the-art care for the injuries they've suffered in combat, that's the federal government every single day. I see it, I believe it. It is not that it's perfect. If you call, the retirement line for former federal employees at OPM is too long when you call. I know that. It would be nice to have some money to fix it. But there is lots of stuff that works, and in fact, when it works, no one wants to write anything about it, so hence we have a small problem. But my colleagues, I know, feel as passionately about this as I do, so.
Yeah, I mean, I would say a couple of things. One of the biggest challenges coming from the private sector into government is this issue that you've got all these, this control. There's not a lot of trust in your flexibility to move money around and move resources or move people around so much. Oh my God, you just want to move one person to do, instead of doing this, do that, because that's more effective, and actually we have an issue here. It's like, it is so complex and too difficult, and that's where trust has broken down. And the idea that, certainly for Bob and I mean, you're a customer service facing organization of the highest order. We're of a different order, but I would argue the weather's equally as important, or as is getting a patent or a trademark, as is getting help to, sell your goods abroad, or needing a license if you have dual use goods. I mean, these are basic services that we provide. But there's so little flexibility. It's really extraordinary, frankly. And the idea that you're going to, so for example, you were talking about steel right before this. So, in the last 3 or 4 years, the surge in steel dumping is massive, right? And we want to get out, and we do enforcement in that. But to add people took us, a couple of years. And so it's because you're planning a budget for 2 years from now, if you're lucky that you have a budget. Budgets are better than no budgets, for sure, in terms of, well, because you have greater clarity, at least for 12 months. Having arrived right before the shutdown, and being open is better than shutdown. I say that just because you're dealing in a sort of alternative universe when it comes to management. It's different, and I'm not critical of the fact that there are more stakeholders. Government should have more stakeholders and more process, and it shouldn't move at the speed of business. Except that we can't afford in a time when our digital technologies are changing the realities on the ground so quickly. We need to have greater flexibility. The other issue I would make is around reorganization. So our department's not, President Obama called for reorganizing the way the federal government deals with American business. We have 16 different agencies that have some responsibility for businesses large and small. They are not all under the Department of Commerce. In fact, probably a third of them are someplace else. I will tell you that whether it's domestically in our innovation agenda, the idea that my job is to promote entrepreneurship and innovation, but the Small Business Administration has the money to help finance that is crazy. It doesn't make sense. I'm not saying merge SBA with some other part of commerce, but I think there should be an overarching Department of Business. So imagine the following. I'm sitting next to Satya Nadella from Microsoft. I said, what if Microsoft hadn't reorganized in 45 years? What kind of company would they be? We've got a company where we're going to market against, around the world, against the Chinese, the Japanese. I mean, we've got huge global competition. And XM is off. First, it's not funded and not operational, or I guess it's maybe funded, but they've effectively neutered it because they don't have a board and they don't have a quorum. But we don't have, 85 other countries in the world have an XM. Plus, it's an independent thing, so it's doing its own thing over here, as opposed to being aligned with, a more coordinated fashion. So it's
even more remarkable what you've been able to accomplish, quite honestly, when you hear the nuance and of the constraints and see who is attracted and retained in the government and in.
And I think part of it is President Obama set a tone of that we're a team, right, and that we have each other's back, and we absolutely have disagreements about things, but we're trying to solve for common. We're trying to acknowledge everybody's equities and trying to solve for common solutions, like we did with NASA, or we've done with the intelligence community when it comes to the US-EU privacy shield, so that we could keep doing $290 billion worth of digital trade with Europe. I mean, so it depends right now on kind of the team, but it doesn't really make organizational sense. But they didn't give it 24 hours of opportunity up on Capitol Hill when the president proposed this it was before my time, 4 years ago. And I think it's crazy. We're at a distinct disadvantage globally.
If I ever had a problem, I would want you to advocate for it.
Well,
I'm passionate.
I'm sorry, I don't want to. I think a number of things. Number one, the diversity of experience of this group is eye-opening relative to the ability to see the differences in the way government operates and how we can change government to operate more like Penny's business or Beth's experience. I'll give you an example. We've had some issues on being able to hire and retain certain people. Beth was able to identify a way we could add to what was in the rule book, and we fixed the situation. Had Beth not had her experience at McKinsey, maybe that wouldn't have come up. So how can we encourage more people not in government to enter government, rather than just having people who are in government forever? I think that's something certainly I'm trying to do, is pitch to our colleagues who have had other experiences to come into government. It's a fulfilling mission.
It also seems that, I think in the past, it probably was you almost feel like you're making a lifetime commitment. And I know that, Beth, you've thought a lot about how to do this as a tour of service. And my sense is that will make the pool enormously I
know we've worked with everybody here around this one, right? In the exit memos that we all wrote to the president, right? I talked about sort of some of the things I think are important going forward. And this idea of people moving in and out, people move around when they do jobs. Like, that is the world we live in. And so how do you create an opportunity that is a accepted path? There's been a bunch of terrific things that this administration's done. The Presidential Innovation Fellows, I know you've had ones at NASA, ones at all of those places, right? Great opportunity for people with real innovation experience, technology talent to come into government, put those things to work. In theory, they're here for a year. About half of them have stayed. Beyond that, the chief technology officer at VA, who's been a phenomenal leader of, transformation to improve service to our veterans, is a former Presidential Innovation Fellow. We're doing the same thing with data. We're trying to do the same thing actually at senior levels. I don't think there's a shortage of people who will do this. And I will tell you, for me personally, for all of the things where I say it's really hard to get things done, when you get it to work, it works at scale, it touches people's lives, and it's completely worth every moment you spend doing it, even though it's a challenge. And that's what these people find when they get here. It's not without its frustrations, but you can really make a difference. And a little bit of talent with people who are ready to receive it can change things.
So, Charles, one of the things that we haven't yet touched on, but is the need to have a really accurate diagnosis before we can come up with a creative and clever prescription. And because you're known so well for all of the good things, can you offer us an illustrative example of a place where you needed a really accurate diagnosis
We
of something?
generally don't need a really accurate diagnosis, or we wouldn't go anywhere. We have learned, I always kid, and I'm kidding, okay? I don't want anybody to take this seriously, but I always tell people, I went to the Naval Academy and I learned to draw a graph with one data point. That's a joke, for those of you who didn't get it. But in space flight, particularly when you're talking about human space flight, we've been flying humans to space since 1960s. You are not going to get a statistically relevant set of data points when you're flying. Now we fly 3 people per launch every 3 months. We used to fly 7 people on the space shuttle, and a lot of flights was 9 a year. You multiply those numbers and add them all up, that is statistically irrelevant. So we have to make decisions about whether we're going to send people to Mars, whether we can accept the risk. And so you learn how to deal with risk and try to become you don't want to be risk averse. So that's one thing. The other thing, going back to what everybody is talking about, we leverage. I'm a Marine, and Marines are noted for what we call midnight acquisitions. If you're next to a good Army unit, or especially an Air Force unit, they got everything we need.
We leverage, yes, yeah.
I'm Army. We put extra guards on at night when the Marines are nearby.
We leverage, and President Obama has really allowed us to go out and do more than we've ever done before. We have more than 800 active partnerships, 800 active agreements today with more than 120 countries. Now, most people wouldn't think about that. Let me give you one quick example of spend the money to completely explore the atmosphere. So we worked with the Indians, helped them develop an atmospheric studying satellite called MOM, the Mars Orbiting Mission. They became the first nation in the history of humanity to get to Mars on the first attempt. So they now have MOM that's orbiting Mars, looking at the lower atmosphere. We launched a satellite called Maven, and I'm not going to tell you what all these acronyms stand for. It launched just a couple of days ahead of MOM. They both got to Mars within days of each other. Maven is looking at the upper atmosphere, which left the middle atmosphere. Guess who's going to cover that? The UAE. The United Arab Emirates is now building a satellite with our assistance that's going to launch hopefully in 2020 to get there in 2021 to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the founding of the United Arab Emirates. And they're going to look at the middle atmosphere. So we will have a complete picture
Wow.
of Mars's atmosphere, and the U.S. will have contributed 1/3 to that picture. And so that's what's really, really, really important. It's important to understand we're not in this alone. We cannot do it alone. And that's kind of hard for some people, particularly I caution everyone, since we have all parts of the political spectrum probably represented in here. Be very cautious when you think that we can do everything. We cannot. We don't operate that way in the military. We don't operate that way in NASA. So we got to figure out a way to, sometimes you work with your enemy to get whatever it is that enables you to get the mission accomplished. So I offer that. The other thing we've done is we have just taken over social media. NASA did not invent it. NASA doesn't contribute anything. NASA doesn't contribute anything to it other than use it. We use the heck out of social media. We don't have an event that we don't invite people to come, and if I'm there, I go in and thank them for coming, and I say, you know, you are now enabling us to reach millions, I mean millions more people than we have ever been able to reach before through conventional media capabilities. So we really take advantage of social media and I ask people, tell them what you felt. Penny's been at some things that we've done, and I don't know whether anybody told you that at a launch, but I don't want anybody to try to tell them the technical stuff. That's immaterial. What I need for people to understand, because the people that are going to give us the money, you know, they get excited when people tell them, boy, this was awesome. So that's what I ask people. Tell them what you felt through whatever means of social media we have. So we use social media, and we partner the heck out of it.
So one of the things that we heard from the first group was the need for great leaders to have humility. I think they were talking about it more from a personal front, and you're now actually talking about it from a national perspective, that we need humility to realize that we don't have the resources on our own, and that
doesn't sit well with
no,
some people.
it
And I mean,
doesn't.
and you know, I had a discussion, one of my earliest hearings in Congress, and it was with a good friend of mine, Frank Wolf, who is no longer in the Congress, and he became a good friend. He was my Appropriations Committee chair, and he got angry with me one day, and it was about something about our ability to get to space. And he said, well, do you think it's okay for the Chinese to beat us to the moon? And I looked at him and I said, Mr. Chairman, to be quite honest, I don't care, because there is only one first. We've already done it. So nobody else is going to be first. Now we've got to figure out how to get us all there. And that's kind of the way we look at it. There are not a lot of things that somebody's going to do before we do, so get over it. But every once in a while we may need for somebody to do something that we haven't done, and that's our approach to entrepreneurial space, commercial space. Elon Musk, man, I love him. Can he do all the stuff he says? Not on your life. But do I care? No, I don't. Because he says something and a million kids decide that, okay, I can do math and science, and I'm going to become an engineer, or I'm going to become a science. So take what you get.
A wonderful thing that has come out of both of you is that a definition of entrepreneurship is that you have the ability to control and influence resources that are not your own. Like you can marshal really well, and so it's marshaling not just across boundaries, but that you help, but across nations, which is really awesome.
Certainly a paradox of contemporary leadership is you can get better results if you give up some control.
Yeah.
And, you know, whether it's the interdependence that Penny sees in a global economy, where we're trading with other countries, and we all know if we trade with other countries that the world, the boats will rise. Whether it's what Charlie is doing, and I hope everyone noticed that even in today's contemporary political dialogue, I think Charlie just said that we're relying on the Russians to send things to space for us.
And we're very proud of it.
And we're proud of
We're
that.
very proud of that, and it just, and I won't dwell on it. Nations are huge, and nations have so many disparate sectors on which they depend. My partners in Russia, I don't deal with the government, but my partner is Roscosmos. My very best friend, one of my very best friends, Sergei Krikalev, with whom I flew my last space shuttle mission, is now the head of human spaceflight for Russia, for Roscosmos. That's when you get things. The military is incredible, because in the military, you form friendships with people that you used to think you hated. When I was told that I was going to go back to Houston, I was in D.C., and they said, we need for you to go back to command a space shuttle mission. I said, what is it? And they said, well, it's going to be the first joint Russian-American mission. I said, forget it. I have no interest in flying with any Russian. I trained my whole life as a Marine to kill them, and they trained to kill me. And my boss said, hey, calm down. He said, I have 2 guys in town. I'd like for you to meet them, and then come back in the morning and give me your opinion. Sergei Krikalev, with whom I flew, was civilian. Incredible engineer, spoke fluent English. The guy who ended up being the backup, Vladimir Titov, was a MiG-21 pilot, had trained to do exactly what I said, spoke not one word of English. The 3 of us had dinner. What we talked about that night was why we wanted to make the world better. We talked about our kids and our families, and we talked about what we thought we could do to make a difference. And I went in the next morning and I said, I'm in, because I think we can make a difference. So, you know, we've got to find ways to identify the people with whom we think we can work and then make it work.
I think an academic parallel is Harvard and Stanford. But we've moved beyond that ability.
Francis,
You are slightly terrifying to me. I don't know if anyone has ever said that to you, but just the resting state. I believe, I've heard that to be true, but holy cow, as a resting state, is it just me? I just want to make sure I'm all tucked in.
Francis, can I say that the systems or the laws of government need to keep up with
Yes.
this change, right? I give you one example.
Although I actually think that you're going to lead this. You have to activate before the laws are going to follow.
Well, you have to activate to get the laws
Yeah.
to follow,
Yeah.
but we talked about the importance of faster cycle budgeting. Well, first of all, getting a budget, but then faster
Yeah.
cycle budgeting. I give you an example. Sunday, I'm going to Omaha, Nebraska, because we have a group of investors there who want to help us build a new VA hospital. They want to give us money. I don't have the authority I didn't have the authority to accept that money. I had to write a new law and then work to get Congress to pass it. And of course, I wrote it in a general way so I could do this in more geographies around the country. And when the law got passed, it was written for Omaha only. So, you know, how do we get the laws to match
Yeah.
the flexibility and agility that we need in order to better serve
Yeah.
our customers?
I'm pretty sure by influencing who is making the laws and who runs for those offices. But that's an academic's perspective, who I told the first group, you didn't hear it. I'm an academic, I don't do anything. I just inspire others to do things. I would love, if there a question from the group that you have burning inside of you? Please, let me bring this microphone so you can hear.
I'm curious, we're just a week away from a bit of a transformation here in the country, and all of your organizations will see the executive suites empty out. So how do you prepare your organizations for that, empowering those below you to lead through that transition and
Can I go
transformation?
first?
Yeah.
We've been preparing for it for a year. Because I had decided that I didn't care who came in, I wasn't staying. That I was gonna stay with the president that brought me in, and when he left, I was leaving. And I'm privileged to have a person that I think is one of the most incredible civil servants in the country, a guy named Robert Lightfoot, who's our chief operating officer, if you will. He's my associate administrator. I started kind of feeding things to him and say, hey, get a team together and help us prepare how we're gonna make the transition. How are we gonna deal with the transition team that comes in from whichever candidate wins? Our hope was, and it didn't work, was that we would be able to talk to 2 transition teams. I think all of us planned for that, and it didn't work, because nobody had a transition team until after the election, and then so we had what we had. But still, we stuck with the plan, and we're just trying to be welcoming and engaging and showing them what we have accomplished and telling them, I tell them that I'm doing I'm very fortunate in that we don't do anything that lasts a year or 2 years or sometimes 5 years in NASA. So a lot of our journey to Mars began 2 bushes ago, when you really look at it. And each incoming administration changed it, sometimes drastically, but
That's an
they're only-
awesome new unit of analysis, 2 bushes ago.
Yeah, two bushes ago.
Yeah.
And actually, it started way long time ago, like with an Eisenhower, but
So you
we're
have
continuing that.
someone, you feel like you have continuity, and I know it was just announced yesterday, you have pretty gracious continuity. I'm wondering, do you also have as gracious of of continuity, or is there?
I've met my successor. In fact, I spent several hours with him last week, taking him through what I thought were the things I wish someone had told me when I took this job, and also the concerns that I had in terms of organization. And then we had done kind of an analysis. I put together a 25-page document from me to my successor, in addition to I can't give it to him until he's confirmed, but it's, I walked him through most of it, including, here are the things, the red flags and things that that really I'm worried in the first 6 to 12 months could be challenges. And our department is so broad in its, we don't do the same thing everywhere. I mean, we just have so many different things that we do. So I tried, and I also laid out where I thought there were opportunities for quick wins for them to establish themselves. So that's on the side of working with the incoming transition. I think our transition's gone pretty well so far. At least that's the feedback I'm constantly asking our
One of the
folks.
one of the definitions of leadership that we hold dear is that leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence, which you have all done. But the second part, which is probably more important, and having it last into your absence. That's a direct attempt to make it better in the past absence. And I would just contrast it with, there are some ambassadors that leave their posts and clean out everything, including the Rolodex and everything, because private information might be more valued than the setting the next person up for success. And so I just want to highlight that's a lovely example.
But that's only one side of the equation. So then the question is for our I call our careers professionals, because they've made a decision, this is their profession. I've actually gone to every single department and met with the careers and talked with them about who and what they are and what they have accomplished, and about what, trying to give them confidence that they know. The truth is you come in as a secretary in a political team, in an organization that's as diverse as ours, there's no way you can get your arms around everything without working with the professional staff that are there. And so what I've told them is, look, you know your job. You know how to do standards. You know how to do the census. It's okay that you're going to have new leaders. They want you to be successful. And so to give them some confidence and courage in the transition about persevering with their work and keeping their eye on the ball. Because our ultimate customer is really the business community. That's our biggest stakeholder. I mean, we obviously have the White House and we have the Hill and think tanks and all these others, but it's the business community that's the biggest beneficiary of our services. And so give them the confidence to do what they do, which is what, so I'm We'll see. We'll see how it goes, but we're trying.
As a person who's, got in some ways oversight over 2 million, what's,
Well, so we're in a little, just
yeah.
factually at the moment, in a different position. We do not have a director named, and that is not unusual. That person in the last two, party to different party transition arrived once in April and once in June. So for the career team at OPM, a period of uncertainty is not unusual. I think, like Penny said, we focused on a couple things. We have a whole series of things we're doing at OPM that are highly operational and nonpartisan. Strengthening our cybersecurity being one example, continuing to work on background investigations, making sure federal employees' health insurance gets processed. The guidance I've given to my team is very similar to yours, which is one, they have the expertise and, having arrived here from outside, there are some quirky, unique, specific things you need to know to understand how to operate these processes in the federal government. They need to use their voice to provide that expertise, because people frankly don't even know what they're missing. Secondly, as I told them, and we have a chief management officer, sort of akin to what Robert Lightfoot does, that we created actually. We did this in thinking about transition. We didn't have that role at OPM, who will lead the agency. She's terrific. She's worked in the agency. She's a phenomenally collaborative, effective leader. And the marching orders I have given to my team, besides use your voices, you know what work needs to get done. And, before I walk out of the door, I want to see your work plan through the rest of the year. I'm not going to be here to make you do it, but those are all the meetings I have between the rest of this week and next week. I want the whole thing spelled out, because as my team will tell you, I love people's work plans. And they've got them, and they're smart. They will adapt to new policy priorities. But in the meantime, we got to do a better job answering telephone calls or whatever it is we need to do.
So I want to take and I take this, I'm struck how perishable this moment is, right? We're going to be, before we're going to evaporate. I mean, not, but you know what I mean. And
Charlie's
so
you're gonna
please
vaporize.
make it good.
Jerry Mann, Department of Agriculture. Charlie, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but one thing I've been really impressed with is your use in procurement of curated communities. And it's just a great story. I was wondering if maybe you'd share some of what you've been able to do.
Well, I gotta make sure I understand, I'm sorry.
No,
I've
you're
gotta-
used to having people.
I understand.
I'll give you one example. So we were in the food, and so we have to measure what people eat. And
Got
you
you.
know, you did
Got
the
you.
space station.
Yeah.
And the way you're able to go out and tap into literally millions of coders.
Exactly, and what he's talking about is we have a crew on space station that's there for 6 months, and you got to feed them. And unlike the shuttle, where a crew was able to pick out their menu for, if they were going for 7 days, then we put 14 days worth of food on. You can't do that on station. So we go out to industry today, and that's, when I say industry, I don't mean like big companies. Frequently, it's mom and pop or other kind of organizations to look for new ways to present nutritious food and the like, and use them. We go to universities and colleges where they're teaching people to become chefs and food service specialists and the like. And then we have a food lab at the Johnson Space Center that you may have had an opportunity to visit, that we try to bring in the Department of Agriculture and others so that we can take it, again, we leverage what you do every day. And we fly experiments for you, like you want to look at a particular seed to see, is it going to germinate in this environment better than that environment? So we try to take advantage of that. I don't know whether that's exactly what you were talking about. Yeah.
We have time for one last question in honor of the time here, please, and let me give you that. You have been a very positive presence the entire time.
Thank you. So the leaders before talked about profitability and how it was often connected to resourcing and enriching the teams that they led. My question to you is, in the public service space, it often seems as if investing into those that fuel the work every day is secondary to the external service delivery. So how do we create a culture that inspires people to raise their hand to say, yes, I want to work for government? Because in doing so, I feel as if that government is able to invest within me.
May I give a very, very quick answer? I entered after a crisis, and during a crisis, what's typically happens in a company or in government is the one thing is the organization shuts down, training goes away, development goes away, and because the way it works in Washington, because of the conventions that occurred where organizations did bad things, doctors weren't allowed to attend professional development opportunities, and even when we were asked to come speak about our innovations, we didn't go. So not surprisingly, nobody knew about our innovations. So what we did was we purposely called out as our second transformational strategy the need to invest in our people. And it was very simple, and this is the connection I would draw for you, is you have no hope of being the very best customer service organization in the federal government if you're also not the very best place to work. If you compare the two lists in the Wall Street Journal or Fortune magazine of the best places to work and also the best customer service, they're the same. They have to be, because who is it that serves those people? So we put a big effort on to train, to develop, to do succession planning. We're not there yet. We've had to change the head of HR, but we're moving in the right direction, and that's important. The recognition that you can't achieve customer service without investing in people is important.
Please.
Yeah, I'll echo what Bob said and just add a little of our own flavor, which is training is something that I think is underinvested in the federal government in general. And so we've made it a new priority. So for example, in our International Trade Administration, we created something called the Commercial Diplomacy Institute. And what I would say is this is where leverage comes in. We've now been leveraging not other, third parties who are willing to come in and teach. We're leveraging not just individuals, but organizations. We've now got companies that say they will take our people for 6 months to a year and train them in their organizations. So partnership becomes really, really important to execute on that. To do that, we need more authorities to do that. And one of the funny things is we happen to have a partnership authority that exists at part of the department. And I have one senator wants to keep shutting down that little agency because they don't get it. And I said, no, we have special authorities there that allow us to partner with the private sector and leverage. And I said, and in fact, there's no appropriated money there. It's all third-party money funding all of this. So, but this gives us flexibility. Well, no, I just need to shut it down because I need to show that I shut something down, and that's kind of little and hard to describe, and it's not very sexy, so nobody's going to come out in favor of it. That is just ridiculous because it's not just about training, but it's also about flexibility to be entrepreneurial in government so that we can take advantage of organizations that want us to be better. The third thing I would say in terms of training is I really have made the argument, and God knows Beth has heard me say this over and over. We do not have the technology talent that we need in the federal government. We are at a disastrous point. And so the Presidential Innovation Fellows is a godsend, but it is not a sufficiently large enough program. It's phenomenal. I'm not picking on it. I love it. What we need to do is we need to go out to large technology companies and explain to them why it would be in their best interest to have people come and work in the federal government for a year or two. We've got to make our environments attractive enough that folks feel like if they come here, they will get unusual experiences that they couldn't otherwise get in their own organization. And one thing I would say, why I know that's true, is we're totally under-resourced. I don't care what your mission is, you're never going to have as much resources as you want. So what happens is we have young people doing all kinds of stuff that in a private sector they would never get the opportunity to do at the stage of the career that they're getting to do it. And so that's what we have to sell. We have to sell experienced learning. And what we need to do is figure out mechanisms that allow, where a company says, you know what, that's in my best interest to send, my budding young 27-year-old or 28-year-old who knows how to code or knows IT or something like that, or knows marketing or whatever. they're gonna get an experience, and they'll come back, and our company will be better off. We need more of that.
And
So,
bring
by the
us
way,
home.
so I agree with everything Penny said. We need to do that. Some of that requires Congress giving us permission. They have now given the Defense Department in this year's National Defense Authorization Act permission to do more of that. They restored an old authority, but we need that permission. And we've argued for doing that, and also for finding other ways to scale the equivalent of the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program. There's another mythbuster about hiring digital services folks. Because the one thing that I think we've all seen is when you can convey to people the impact they can have, they get it. The U.S. digital service folks, we are no shortage of people who have signed up. It's how do we do that, and how do we make it happen without it being a slow and painful process that you're exhausted by?
Well,
And so that's
also
what we
where
need to do.
they're not losing a career trajectory.
Absolutely.
That's the other thing.
Yeah.
That's why I think business is ultimately our partner in this.
Absolutely, I
Because, you know.
completely agree with you.
Because why would I step off my career at a company unless I, for some reason, it's just not the average person that will do that.
No, but we've looked at this in cyber. We've been doing this cyber human capital stuff, including with NIST and a part of Commerce that works on that. And one of the themes in the cyber human capital plan is to find a way to do this, because frankly, we need those tools from the federal government, but the state of the art is here. And so how do you, and our cyber defenses with the private sector are completely intertwined. So this will serve the government well, it will serve those companies well, it will serve the economies well. We need that fluidity back and forth.
So I want to end where we began, and in deference to everyone's time, which is that first, this wouldn't have happened without you. No, you're looking to the next. So, but deeply for bringing this group together, for including me for most of it. I'm grateful, and to the audience. It was a really, you didn't have to, and it was to create courage and inspiration and perhaps some practical tips. And I think accomplished, and so thank you very much for that graciousness and generosity.
Thank you to everybody for coming, and especially thank you to my colleagues, Penny and Beth and Charlie and John and Joe and Nancy.
Yeah.
There's nothing, everyone said it, there's nothing more important than leadership. Leadership is a blessing. It's also an obligation. We can affect people's lives. And as Beth has said and Penny has said, we can affect more people's lives in government than we can in the private sector. So having these kinds of discussions about what can we learn from each other about transformative leadership, I think, is very valuable. And Frances, thank you for doing such a great job bringing it all out.
Total.
Thank you.
Yeah, total pleasure. Total pleasure.